My name is Deirdre Clemente. I am a member of the history department. I study 20th century American culture. I specialize in the 1920s. I always joke that my dad's a sociologist and my mom's an avid Vogue reader, so I think I was destined to study fashion history. As one of my slides demonstrates, I have lived a life of costume, and here are some of them coming up, including a 20-cent dress from the 1970s that I wore to hike Mount Vesuvius, a 1948 themed wedding, and I think those pink tights with my Aunt Judy there are actually a costume. So today I'm here to talk about a subject that first began my academic research into fashion. F. Scott Fitzgerald and his legendary flappers have been at the basis of many of my projects, including a consulting work with the recent film by Baz Luhrmann. And on the screen you can see some of the historical materials I provided for Luhrmann and his crew. I'm here today to talk about the flapper. You've all seen her before. There she is. She, like so many cultural icons, the hippie, the Black Power activist, is linked to her appearance. And that has really limited the kind of scholarship that is done with her. But you know her. She's the one who has a bob and dances the Charleston. She comes at a very pivotal moment in American history as men and women shift from homosocial socializing to heterosocial socializing, as witnessed in this mixed environment of the barbershop and, of course, images of John Held Jr. So how do we get her wrong? What's the historical inaccuracy? First of all, we think she comes from the 1920s, when she has been 2 decades in the making. Her skirts weren't that short, and her morals weren't that loose. In fact, her style isn't as monolithic as we think it is, and it's also very enduring. Myth number 1, she comes from the 1920s, and I think really that's really a difficult idea for us to shake. But she really, when you think of her as the culmination of the first 2 decades of the American century, it's a little bit easier to understand her arrival. By 1905, we have natural waist, far less corseting. We have, by 1915, a risen hemline, and again, a natural waist, sloping shoulders. 1925, dropped waistline, more skin exposed, shorter hemline, and historically incorrect heels, just for the record, for the sticklers among us. How did this play out in regular fashion? We have dropped waist, more skin. This is 1905, neckline, lower neckline, transparent fabrics, sort of eye-catching, right? 1910, again, 1915 evening dress, showing more of the skin. And by 1925, we have exposed arms, exposed necks, and of course, the famous flapper legs. So what made the flapper? Historical context, the new appreciation for exercise and the lithe body, the consolidation of the American sportswear and fashion industry, of course, the development of youth culture, and again, this shift from homosocial to heterosocial socializing. Myth number 2 is the hardest to shake. It's that the flapper wore short skirts, and at no point during the flapper era were skirts anywhere officially above the knee. And as we can see from this image, many of them came down to the ground. This, of course, is the iconic 1920s silhouette, and it's really the example of the haute couture setting a style and the rest of the mass amount of people following it. We have Jean Patou, French designer, beautiful 1925 evening gown, and that's about the length that we're really talking about for the majority of the era. What's more interesting than the length of the skirts are the ways that women would use clothing to expose their bodies. So you have many examples. This is an incredible piece that you take off that top part shawl, and you have an exposed undergarment underneath it, a dress underneath it, transparent fabrics, car wash hems, you know what I'm talking about. Historical context, the rise of American consumerism. At this time, there's fundamental shifts in how people sell clothing, right? Department stores, mass marketing, how people buy clothing off the rack, on credit, and in sizes. This is the rise of sizing as a way of selling. Sexual practices are notoriously hard to document, and historians live and die by documentation. So when we look at you know, the idea of the flapper as having more sex, that's something very difficult to document. But what do we know about sexuality in the 1920s? Well, we know that there is an increased knowledge of sex. We know that there's an increased access to birth control. Of course, this is on the edge of the progressive movement, right, who brought a lot of that kind of stuff to the fore. We see, again, this shift in heterosocial socializing and less parental policing in what their children are doing. Now, the flapper sits at the edge between the whirly, squirrely Art Nouveau and that sort of more streamlined Art Deco. And so the clothing has been influenced by everything from King Tut's tomb that was discovered around this time to the rise of streamlined moderne, think the Chrysler Building. Now, the embellishments on these clothing were indeed indulgent. You have all kind of stenciling, lots and lots of velvet, which at the time was very difficult to produce, expensive to produce. And you see lots of influences in these clothing, right? So you see bead and beadwork that has an Egyptian flair to it. And it's all from this sort of loosey-goosey cultural soup that designers like to dip into that's called, you know, Orient. It's Middle Eastern, it's Asian, and you can really see it on these opera coats from Babani, sort of that Mongolian fur collar with a cocoon sleeve. This is very Persian, right, with that scrolling gold details. In 1927, Jean Patou, you just saw his beautiful gold evening dress, drops the hemlines, 1927, and it plays out into what people wear. Honestly, skirts are getting so long that it's a dead giveaway as to the vintage if they don't come way down, almost to the ankle. So the skirt line, the hemlines go up and they come down. But as we all know, the flapper, as witnessed by these runway shots, is still around today and is a prevalent part in American culture. Why? Well, as F. Scott Fitzgerald said of the 1920s, we were America. Who could tell us what was fashionable and what was fun? Thank you.